Hi, everyone. We're going to wait a second, let people join. It's great to see you back, or if this is your first event, we are so excited that you are here with us. All right, everyone, welcome back to the nonprofit Pat Conroy Literary Center's 5th annual and first virtual March 4th, now a 3-day event. March 4th commemorates the anniversary of Pat Conroy's death with a series of educational and inspirational conversations about some of the major themes of Mr. Conroy's life: storytelling, conservation, social justice, and inclusivity. Our March 4th programs are presented in partnership with Penn Center, Nevermore Books, the Beaufort County School District, and First Presbyterian Church of Beaufort. This year's March 4th is sponsored by South Carolina Humanities, a non-for-profit organization inspiring, engaging, and enriching South Carolinians with programs on literature, history, culture, and heritage. We're grateful to all of our partners, sponsors, presenters, attendees, and volunteers for making possible this signature annual program for our nonprofit Conroy Center. As the keynote conversation for our 5th annual March 4th, we are honored to welcome Bakari Sellers, author of the New York Times best-selling memoir, My Vanishing Country, and also the son of one of our past March 4th presenters, civil rights icon Cleveland Sellers Jr. Bakari Sellers made history in 2006 when, at just 22 years old, he defeated the 26-year incumbent state representative to become the youngest member of the South Carolina state legislature and the youngest African-American elected official in the nation. In 2014, he was the Democratic nominee for Lieutenant Governor of South Carolina. Mr. Sellers is a CNN political analyst and was recently named to Time Magazine's 40 Under 40 list. He is also a practicing attorney who fights to give a voice to the voiceless. Mr. Sellers will be interviewed by Charleston Post and Courier journalist and editor Adam Parker, a longtime student of the civil rights movement and race in America. Mr. Parker is the author of Outside Agitator, The Civil Rights Struggle of Cleveland Sellers Jr., published by Hub City Press. Mr. Parker has made several appearances on behalf of our Conroy Center, including with Cleveland Sellers Jr. at our 2019 March 4th. Please welcome Bakari Sellers and Adam Parker.
Hi, everybody.
Yeah, thank you for that introduction. That was good.
And thanks to all for joining us. I assure you both, Bakari and I are wearing pants. And it's great to be here, and it's great to talk to you, Bakari. Hi.
Hey, what's going on? I'm glad to be joining you. And thank you to everybody who's taking some time out on this dreary Saturday morning to spend some time with us.
Well, what better thing to do on a drizzly morning than to spend some time with us, truly.
Truly.
So what we will do is chat for a while and then open the floor to questions. I'm sure many people will think of things to ask Bakari. I want to start by congratulating you on your book, My Vanishing Country, which I know you struggled to get published and struggled to write. It's a very personal memoir. And you touch on all kinds of things in the book. And then, lo and behold, it's done really, really well. So congratulations on that. And for those who might not be familiar with the book or might not have read it yet, I want to ask you about the title, My Vanishing Country. What do you mean by vanishing?
So first, thank you for acknowledging the book. I laugh with my father all the time and say that I am the first New York Times bestseller from the big city of Denmark, South Carolina. So I got that going for me. I think the city should be large enough to qualify for that honor, so I will take it.
The metropolis of Denmark.
I know. 3 stoplights and a blinking light. And so thank you for that. It was an interesting process in writing. Actually getting signed was the most difficult process because it took, I got turned down about 30 times to write what I wanted to write, which was a political book, being Black and progressive in the South in the age of Trump, that no one wanted to buy. I saw, for those asking, I didn't set out to write a memoir. I wanted to write one of these political books that many people wrote. And I think that the resolve of most publishers was, why would I buy a book from you when I can just get someone from inside of Trump's orbit, which in hindsight makes really good sense. And so when I sat down to write this book, you kind of, you sketch it, you outline it, you write. We had to write extremely fast because I wrote this book in 4.5, 5 months.
Took me 10 years.
Well, I beat you by a little bit there.
A little bit, yeah.
But the pressure was on because there was another guy, another tall, skinny guy with a funny name, named Barack Obama, with a book coming out in the fall. And the last thing that you wanted was to overlap. Yeah. If people got $30, they're not going to buy My Vanishing Country. That's just the way the world works. But My Vanishing Country, it speaks to 2 things, one on the macro and one on the micro level. On the micro level, growing up in Denmark, what once was a bubbling hub, it really was, along 321. Some people may know 321 was the highway before I-95. It took you from Miami all the way to New York City. If you go down through Allendale and Hampton County, you see the old rundown motels along the route of 321. When you look in the city of Denmark, we were unique because we actually had, we were one of the only places in the southeast corridor that had railroad tracks that went north, south, east, and west. And so, around the early 90s, with the passage of NAFTA and CAFTA, where you started to see our textile mills, manufacturing plants leave, was probably the beginning of a great deal of neglect for these rural areas. And so growing up, and just to give you a clear example, on Main Street in Denmark, we had a bakery, a bank, a theater, appliance store, 5 and dime store, record store, Chinese food restaurant, furniture store, grocery store, and then you come down to the post office, and 1, 2, 3 gas stations at the intersection, right? That was the downtown. But like many places, when you ride through now, the bakery's still there. One of the best bakeries in the state, but not much else. And so our communities are literally vanishing before our eyes, especially our rural communities of color. And then from the macro level, growing up Black in the South in this country, one of the things that I had to acknowledge was that the promises, and I think that most can agree, especially over the last 4 years, the promises of this country, not just life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, but those not so tangible ideals like love, truth, hope, peace, justice, are also vanishing and becoming fleeting and more difficult to attain. And so we touch on those in the book as well.
Do you sense that we're at a figurative crossroads historically then? I mean, there's sort of the experience you had growing up in Denmark and sort of watching the start of its decline, economic decline and so on. And now we're in this interesting moment where many people think or hope that there's an ongoing reckoning happening, a conversation that many people are more willing to have than ever before. And so what does this sort of mean in terms of the grand sweep of history? Do you feel that we're on a good path, a good trajectory?
And usually people end with that question. Adam, now you got me thinking early in
there. Yeah, I know. I figured we just go big.
Yeah, we just go big. Go big. You're pulling out your inner Chris Cuomo here. So I crossroads for me is an interesting term because I'm hopeful that we're at a crossroads. Because
We could sell our souls to the devil and become really good blues guitarists. That's what happens at Crossroads, you know.
That is what happens at Crossroads.
Yeah.
But which one of us is the talent and which one of us is the funny one, I think is probably the better question. But I would say that is the question of the day. Like, are we at a crossroads? There is a hope that we're there at that crossroads. For me, though, there is a fear that this is repetitive, that we've seen this before. Now, I know that this is a weird convergence of American historical events in one time period. Like in the last 365 days, you've had 1918, 1928, 29, and 1968 all in 1 year. Like, I get that.
Yeah.
What I'm also afraid of is, the challenges of my father's generation and the challenges of my generation. For example, my father had Emmett Till, we have George Floyd. My father had the 16th Street Baptist Church, we have Mother Emanuel Amy. When you begin to put it in perspective like that, it makes you think that we're not breaking this cycle. And that's my fear. I'm hoping that we're at a crossroads where we break the cycle and we can choose a direction that is more just for us all. But my fear is that every time this country's been at a moment like this, in 1955, we had Emmett Till, where Mamie Till, his mother, had the audacity to have an open casket, and this country missed that moment. We had the Edmund Pettus Bridge. It was the first time that white folks outside of the South have been able to see on nightly news Black people being beaten and bludgeoned, water hoses, dogs, etc. We missed that moment. April 4th of 68, literally, it was the Celtics and the Sixers about to play that night after the assassination of King. The world literally had stopped. They went ahead and played the game, but that just tells you James Brown performed in Cambridge, right outside of Boston, and prevented the city from burning down. I mean, the country literally stopped at the assassination of King, but we missed that moment. And Adam, you and I and many people on this Zoom today recall on the funeral of my good friend, your good friend Clemente Pinckney, when Barack was off key as all hell, but he sang Amazing Grace, right? And during that moment, I tell people, you missed every note when AME ministers have to lift you up, right? So, he didn't hit their note in Amazing Grace. But we were awash in patriotism. When you walked out of TD Arena, you felt different. I mean, it was something in that moment, but we missed it. And so my fear is this feels different. It does, with Taylor Swift and Carson Wentz and Trevor Lawrence and Netflix and all of these people kind of saying the right things and attempting to meet us at where we are. But I never really thought I would quote Reagan, but here we are, I guess.
No, don't. Okay, no, go ahead.
But
Fine.
we got to trust but verify.
Yeah.
And the question is, will we still have, and then to be completely blunt and honest, which is what I kind of get paid to do, will white folks still have this resolve a year from now, or will we be moved on?
So I have two observations in response to that. One is, in your own book, your dad does seem to think there's some reason for optimism. You quote him as saying that you have to keep up the fight, basically.
Correct.
That it'll change with your generation, but you still have to fight for it.
Correct.
And obviously you're ambivalent about that.
I mean, the question is, will we fight? The answer is yes.
Well, yes, but will it change is the...
Yeah, and how quickly does that change come? I mean,
historically, it's very slow. And my other observation, I'm sorry to interrupt you. I'll shut up in just 1 second. The other observation I wanted to make is sort of twofold. One, President Biden empowered HUD to examine the long history of road projects and development over the decades that have negatively impacted Black communities, often very deliberately, roads cutting through Black communities and so on and so forth. And Biden seems to want HUD to come up with a plan to address this historical wrongdoing, a plan that has the potential, it seems to me, to look a little bit like reparations, or an aspect of reparations. And similarly, in the current COVID bill, there's a huge amount of money designated for Black farmers, and an explicit acknowledgement of the historical wrongs committed against Black farmers. And so it feels, and this is, to me, this is new. I've never heard this kind of acknowledgement come out of the highest levels of our government before. And I'm kind of hoping that it signals some sort of change. Again, I don't know that it will. I think we'll have to
No,
fight.
I hear you. I mean, that's why I said, this moment feels different, but you have to trust but verify. I mean,
Yeah.
what you're talking about from a policy perspective is something that drives me crazy because my friends on the left and the right dealing with issues of race have a problem with the way that we legislate. And so let me reverse engineer your statement, which was very intuitive. I mean, when you talk about the things Biden is doing, there has been a huge tug, some of which I've been a part of, to get him to acknowledge we're not there yet, but to understand this is something that my friend, particularly white progressives and conservatives, both miss. There is this theory of you have to rising tides lift all boats, which is probably the second most poorly crafted political phrase ever, and it pisses me off when people say that. The first is that I don't see race. That drives me crazy. The second is rising tides lift all boats, because like what happens if you don't have a boat, or you're like your dinghy has a hole in it, right?
Or it's run aground.
Exactly. So like that just drives me crazy, because you can't have race neutral policy to effectuate change with race specific problems. And what you're talking about, those specific targets, are something that for many of us are definitely a step in the right direction. I was lead counsel on the Pickford case, which was the first iteration of the National Black Farmers lawsuit. We settled for $1.2 billion for the denying of Black farmers those loans. But you spread that out across across the entire playing field. In Flint, they still don't have water. In Denmark, we have antiquated pipes that we used hallow sand, and I'm in the middle of a lawsuit with the city of Denmark right now, which is a chemical that they use in to clean jacuzzis. In Jackson, Mississippi, people have been without water for weeks now because of the bad infrastructure. We still, Adam, you know this better than most, we still have a corridor of shame in South Carolina. Kids go to school where their heating and air don't work. Their infrastructure is falling apart. The hospital in Bamberg just shut down. So yeah, I mean, you are rightfully acknowledging, I think, the path we have to go down, because a lot of people don't understand or can't fully grapple with the notion of systemic and institutionalized racism and oppression, which is what we're talking about. Right. I like to quote Stokely Carmichael, who said, and you can tell I'm a child of Cleveland and Gwen quoting Stokely here, but I like to quote Stokely, who said that if you want to lynch me, that's your problem. But if you have the power to lynch me, that's my problem. Because racism that we're talking about is a power construct. I'm not talking about anybody calling me nigger. I get that every day. All you got to do is go look on social. Every time I get off Wolf Blitzer, my comments are littered, right? But we're not talking about that. We are talking about changing these systems, these structures, and that's what's difficult. That is in South Carolina, for example. We remember the leader of the red shirts was Pitchfork Ben Tillman, right? We know the KKK got sent underground. This is consummate Charleston Low Country Beaufort history. We all know this. KKK was sent underground. The iteration of South Carolina, the red shirts led by Ben Tillman, etc. Well, Ben Tillman is one of the most influential politicians in the history of this state, if not the most influential. He created a budget and control board so that there would never be a Negro if there was one elected governor, because there was a lot of us in the state of South Carolina who could have absolute control. We still have a budget and control board by a different name. Like that's not a figment of our long lost past. That still is a structure of our state government. And so trying to unwind these systems and my next book, Adam, that I'm writing is really focusing on unwinding these systems, but even more importantly, being hopeful and reimagining what this country should look like.
Yeah. You're absolutely right to touch on the challenges at the regional and state and local levels. I mean, it's one thing to talk big and to but if the work isn't done kind of at the local level, which brings me to Orangeburg and again, this question of reparations. You and I have talked about this a lot, and a lot of other people have talked about this. There's never been, first of all, I wonder about all of our listeners here or viewers and to what extent they know about the Orangeburg massacre. You can read about it in Bakari's book. He writes extensively about it. You can read about it in my book. It was the
Or
first
you can read,
ever
or you can just read The Authority, which is the Orange.
the Orangeburg Massacre by Jack Bass and Jack Nelson, which describes it minute by minute. Yeah, for sure. And it was the first ever campus shooting involving law enforcement. And it got overshadowed by Kent State a couple years later. And I won't get into all the details, but Bakari's father was caught up in it, even though he was really on the margins of the student protest that was underway. They were protesting a segregated bowling alley up the street. And it just, the white people freaked out. They thought Black Power was in town to disrupt the entire town. And it got very ugly very quickly. And there was a terrible shooting on the campus of unarmed students that ended up killing 3 and injuring at least 28, probably many more, who never went to the hospital or reported their injuries.
We don't have an accurate count of the people shot, which is still wild to me to this day.
Well, and so this brings me to my question. So there's never really been a formal investigation and a formal effort to repair the damage that the state inflicted on this community. You've called for it when you were a state legislator. You submitted a bill to try to get this done, a blue ribbon committee. That didn't happen, and it still hasn't happened 53 years later. And I'm wondering, to what extent can we as a community in South Carolina break through these historic brick walls so and get to a point where we can pursue a kind of truth and reconciliation process, and ultimately some way to repair the damage?
I mean, that's a good question. If you were asking Cleveland Sellers that question, he would say you can't until you know this. He says you can't until you address the Orangeburg Massacre. He refers to it as the litmus test of
Right.
South Carolina. Don't know if he's right or wrong about that, but I will tell you that there is this wound that is pretty glaring, within all of us and those individuals and entire community that was affected by this. And for those who may not know, it's funny, you say there were no investigations, there weren't, but there were 2 whole trials. The law enforcement officers were tried, and I want to say they were found not guilty in like 17 minutes or something crazy like
Right. All acquitted.
All acquitted. But it was the first time this was the first time in American history that law enforcement officers were tried for federal civil rights violations because of the shooting of unarmed Black folk, but they were still found not guilty. And then my daddy went to trial with a trial of 10 whites and 2 Blacks, only for them to come back and find him guilty on a backdated indictment of rioting. He became the first and only one-man riot in the history of this country.
Exactly.
But with that in that story, those stories were so eloquently told by yourself in the Outside Agitator. So thank you for breathing that life into that story. But the question that you ask is one where, we talk about how slowly the arc bends towards justice. We had, Mark Sanford, who came down and apologized. I think that it was Jim Hodges who expressed regret, but we've never actually opened up our eyes to see what happened that night. And because Governor McNair, which I write about in my book, was on the short list of being vice president of the United States, he did everything he could to cover that up and move forward. I also delve into the conspiracy theory, which is I'm not a conspiracy theorist, but one of the theories that many people hold to be true, that Henry Smith looked eerily like my dad. And Henry Smith was the only person that night who took a gunshot wound to the head. And so when you think about all of those things, I think that, it kind of it commands an investigation. And I think it will help the healing process. I mean, part of the larger question, which is another theme that I'm touching on in writing. And by the way, I don't know if you've seen Judas and the Black Messiah as a random side note, but you should watch it. It's the story of Fred Hampton. And everyone who is watching us today should spend some time this evening and watch that. It's on HBO Max. It's really well done. Fred Hampton's phone was being tapped from the age of 13 by the FBI. It's a fascinating story, but you see the impact of the way government treated these individuals at that time. But you speak to a larger point, which is something that drives me crazy. And we saw it January 6th. We've seen it with Orangeburg. And let me draw the nexus between the two. People always want us to turn the page. And they always want us to forgive. But nobody ever wants to go through the atonement or the accountability phase, the difficult work that has to be done before you always get to, forgiveness. It amazes me because people are always, Ralph Norman, and I remember him talking about January 6th, we got to get over that. Or when you talk to folk about what happened in the 60s, or what happened in the 20s or 30s, or what happened after that period of Reconstruction here in the South, or the years of slavery and degradation, those individuals walking and being brought in bondage over here, being raped and brutalized. And people always want us to just forget or forgive, but there's never any mention of accountability or atonement. And that's what drives me crazy.
It's interesting, this points to, as I see it anyway, one of these kind of core dilemmas that the African American community faces. Historically, forgiveness has been, misunderstood by white people, first of all. Black forgiveness is not the same as white forgiveness. Let's put it that way. But in order to survive and forge a path forward, I guess African Americans have been forced to either forgive or go insane.
I mean, the best example of that is Charleston. And people are like, so why? Tell me about after the killing of Clem and 8 others. They were like, why did those ladies, why did they stand up and forgive Dylan Roof right then? You know what? I'm like, yeah, we've seen this before. Like
constantly
we've lived through this brutality before. Like this is not new. This doesn't mean we're not righteously indignant or angry. I mean, but we understand that anger is not a sin as well, which I write about. But this was not a new, and that is a way in which we're able to cope and move forward.
But it's also a way to shift the burden onto white America. And this is what people don't quite fully understand. They look to Black people and just assume, well, of course they're going to forgive because they're stuck. What else are they going to do? And in fact, Black people are far more savvy than most white people realize when it comes to this forgiveness business. It seems to me what they're doing is saying, look, this is a problem and you're part of the problem, or you're the source of the problem, and you need to deal with this. It's, in a way, I think James Cone, the late theologian, expressed it as a kind of form of rebellion in a way. You forgive, but to your point, you're not forgetting, you're not angry about it, you're not. So it's a very interesting and complex dynamic, this forgiveness business, and I think it's worth studying.
My only point to all of this is that we have to go through that period of accountability and atonement before we can get to that true healing, and we take that step.
Yeah, you mentioned in your book your friend Pop, and I was reading about that, and I was sort of reminded of this related question that I sometimes raised when it comes to like the arts. Actually, you'd think it's not related, but it is. Honest, bear with me for a second.
I'm giving you some leeway here. Bring it home.
Right. All right. So, when you look at the art world and you look at Black artists, painters and sculptors and things, there's a certain expectation that African Americans will make art about the African American experience and about the issues concerning the African Americans today. And I've always wondered, that seems a little unfair. Like, what if you just want to paint a still life or a landscape? Like, does a Black artist have to deal with race all the time? And of course, the answer is no. And Black artists have painted still lifes and landscapes, to be sure. But there is nevertheless this expectation. I think even among African American artists, part of it's a choice,
Especially
obviously.
it's also geographical too. So and Jonathan Green has set this stage that when I see a Southern artist, I'm like, there's going to be a cotton field somewhere,
Right. And you paint what you know, and you want to paint from your experience or write or whatever. I get it. It's all good. It's all fine. I'm not criticizing. I'm just observing. But there's this dilemma. And you were mentioning Pop and his struggle and striving for success and striving to get educated and all this stuff. And it led me to a question about, to what extent does a civic leader like yourself feel this obligation to serve and to uplift your community and to work hard to improve? And to what extent should you be free just to do your own damn thing?
So this is where you have these unique clashes, because for me that is, and I think it's growing up in Denmark and being a child of the movement. Like I ascribe to the notion that I can't be free until we all are free, right? That my burden is to carry Pop's burden as well. Like and that becomes that drives, it pushes my angst and my anxiety. It's not, doesn't necessarily provide the most healthy, environment to thrive in. But this is a unique question that's asked, particularly amongst Black elected officials, because Barack Obama didn't necessarily have that same level of consciousness. And I think it made him more palatable to a lot of white folks to get elected.
Yeah.
By the way, you'll find no greater fan of Barack Obama than myself. I consider him a friend, but it's just it's that different circumstances and different backgrounds that people are raised in. And I think a lot of times when you see public servants, especially those who emanate from the South, they carry that extra layer of consciousness with them. And it's a burden that I think we unfairly pass down sometimes. I guess one of the examples, again, that I'm writing about now is my daughter is 15 years old. I have a 15-year-old and then I have 2-year-old twins. And my 15-year-old, after George Floyd, she put her mask on, went out with 2 of her girlfriends and had their Black Lives Matter signs, and they protested in the streets all day. And, we, as Sellers, that's what you're supposed to do. Like, I sent the pictures to my dad. We were all proud. But it's such conflicting emotion, because there becomes a point when I just want my daughter to be able to be like Barron Trump. Like, why can't she be like Barron and just be 15 and not have to reaffirm her identity on a sign and go out when she cries at night because she's seen 8 minutes and 46 seconds that will forever change her life? And I was just raised and believed that we can't ignore that for me, it's not an option to go out and just be. Because there are others who don't have that opportunity. And I think you read it correctly. Pop was, I wanted people to be able to see everything I was because of the opportunities and the environment I was in. And also be able to, when you look at all the successes, as some people may say, and failures that I've had throughout, but I also wanted you to see that Pop could have been in the same position, but had a different circumstance growing up, and we have to do everything we can to improve his circumstance because I'm not atypical. There's nothing special about me. I was fortunate enough to have those opportunities, and we have to create those opportunities for others.
For others, yeah. You also talk in the book about your anxiety, that you suffer from a little anxiety and fear of death, and largely due to childhood experiences, I suppose, and growing up with an activist father who, hearing about his own story. Tell us a little bit about how you cope with your anxiety.
Therapy. I'm a big time believer in therapy. I go to my therapist once every 2 weeks.
Therapy and tattoos.
Therapy and tattoos, yes. I had to slow down on my tattoos. My daughter was born with a liver illness. She had to get a liver transplant, and we thought they were going to use my liver. And so, we for about a year or two, I was getting my body right about a year, I was getting my body right. And then finally she was able to get her liver transplant. We got that phone call. But I still one day may donate a portion of my liver to kind of pay it forward. So I'm staying tattoo free right now, which means I need to have more therapy, right? You got to keep that
right, the balance.
Man,
tattoo shrink.
I know, really. I know. They're both expensive. For me, I suffer from anxiety for two reasons, and they're both they're so intertwined. They're like inextricably connected. One is fear of death, and the other is the fear of failure. A lot of it has to do with my father's experience and passing down that trauma, that anger, that angst, that anxiousness. The other is when I was in sixth grade going to seventh, one of my friends who was in eighth grade going to ninth had a heart attack and died on the football field. And so I grew up from a very young age without having, kids have a sense of invincibility. Like nothing's going to happen to us. That's why we jump off everything. That's why we run in traffic. That's why we touch hot things, right? Because we have this sense of invincibility. And mine was shattered at a very young age because of that death. And, we don't know how to deal with it. We don't know how to talk about it. And I really wrote that chapter. I wrote each chapter for like a different group, which is probably something you should not do when you're writing. I like identity politics the hell out of my book, but it turned out it was a good recipe. But I wrote that chapter particularly.
There's something for everybody in that book.
For everybody in here. But I wrote that chapter for Black men in particular, because we most times think we can only go out and talk to people or talk to our barbers. It's taboo to have mental health issues in a Black community. And I wanted people to be able to see my struggles. And it was, you're a much better writer than I am. It was either cathartic or therapeutic. I don't know which word is right. It may be both, but it felt good to put that on paper and get that out. So maybe as much as I wrote that for somebody else, I think I wrote that chapter for me too.
Well, and I think people don't fully appreciate the fact that the Black experience in America is, you're hardly alone. Who hasn't endured some form of anxiety and fear of death?
But you think about raising, when I speak to I'm a lawyer, and I'm in these very interesting circles where I appreciate the conversations, although sometimes it's exhausting, that my white friends want to have with me. And they're like, man, you're here. Like, it would be in the Palmetto Club or the Capital City Club, or you'd be traveling, right? And somebody will pull you, racism ain't that bad. It don't exist, right? What you hear, what you talking about, man? You always talking that oppression stuff. And I'm like, all right, but when was the last time you talked to your kids about how they need to interact with law enforcement? Okay, shut the hell up. Let's move on. Right. That is, we still have to have these conversations, and those conversations are not just exhausting, but those conversations are anxiety inducing, to say the least. I have a 15-year-old who has a license now, and when she leaves or the police get behind her, or just going and coming back, that's one thing. And then, raising these two kids, you want them to have so much, and you understand the obstacles. And I literally have to prepare my kids when they leave the house to run faster and jump higher and do everything that much better.
I'm stuck on this thing that you said about when you encounter some of your white friends and they say, well, racism isn't that bad. To me, that sounds like they're denying your life experience. They're denying.
It's not, I don't know if this is denying as much as they want to be willfully ignorant. It goes back to the person who
but it amounts to the same thing.
Yeah, but that to me is equally. You can take Tucker Carlson one night who says that racism doesn't exist and read Dr. Seuss books for the entire hour of his show, whatever, however long his show is. And you could take the white progressive who contributes to Planned Parenthood, but she wants to say, I don't see race. I mean, those two things to me are kind of one and the same. Like those are issues that we both have to unravel and deal with. And that's why this issue of race is so complicated, and it's been we've allowed it to fester for too long.
Yeah, I mean, if our viewers aren't familiar with the book The Color of Law by Richard Rothstein, that's one I'd recommend. It came out just a few years ago, and it records the many ways that our government has very deliberately and purposefully and formally implemented policies that are fundamentally racist and harmful to Black communities. And so there's a lot to undo about our history and our policy.
And it's not just criminal justice.
It's not just,
no. We're talking about redlining. I mean, we're talking about the
housing policies, mortgage access.
Mortgage access, you have deeds that were written, you have these low to no interest federally backed loans that were passed to purchase homes, but the deeds and covenants said you could buy them, sell them as long as you did not sell them or allow a person of color to, or Negro is what the deed said. So you have these entire developments, and we know that people getting that access to wealth. We still have.
And back to Black farmers,
I'm going to go back to our quarter of shame. I mean,
quarter of shame, education, farming. I mean, all of these things are wealth generators, right? If you get access to land, or buy property, if you're able to, then that generates wealth for the next generation, the next generation, the next generation. And but of course, African Americans were systematically denied those opportunities.
Yeah.
Well, I think we're going to turn to questions in a second. I'm just scanning my notes to see if I had any essential last questions for you before we turn it over to others.
You will call me tonight and say, Bakari, I forgot to.
Yeah. Oh God. I mean, we could go forever. We could go. We haven't even talked about okay, how about that? I'll end with this question.
Sure.
What lessons did you learn from your two political campaigns? When you were 21 and running for the state house, and when you were 29, I think, and running for lieutenant governor. They were very different experiences, I understand. But tell me a little bit about the lessons you learned in each.
Well, the first is the person with the most votes wins. I learned that.
Not always.
That is true. Not always. Let me take that back. Not always.
Take it back.
Take it back. I had a great deal of success in both races. For those people who are watching around the state and around the country, in 2014, when I ran for lieutenant governor, I raised $750,000, which at that time for lieutenant governor was a lot of money. I got 41.5% of the vote. My very good friend who ran one of the best races I've ever seen run in South Carolina raised $109 million to unseat Lindsey Graham. He raised, I don't do math well, but I'm gonna tell you it's approximately $108 million more than me. And he got 1.5% more than I did in South Carolina. So it just tells you that a lot of the things that we're facing are demographic changes, are that uphill battle, cultivating new voter bases, and it's going to take expanding our electors. It's going to take a few years. But man, I learned how to campaign back in 2006. The knocking on doors, the meeting people where they are, the Black radio, the going to places where people don't think you're going to go. There was not a day I wasn't meeting people, and it just ended up being 55% of the vote. As you know, I ran against somebody who was 82 years old and had been in office for 26 years, which was longer than I had been born. It was a fascinating race. In my 8 years in the South Carolina House, although I would never go back to the South Carolina State Legislature for any amount of money in the world.
Not even the $10,000 they pay you?
Not $10,600 to be exact.
Sorry.
I would not do that, but that was the greatest 8 years of my life, being able to serve. And I wanted to run. to kind of put a bow on this history, I wanted to run and run statewide and hopefully be the first African-American elected statewide since 1876, when there was a Black lieutenant governor running as a Democrat and a Black lieutenant governor running as a Republican. But who beat me to that title? Tim Scott. Tim Scott in 2014 became the first African-American elected since Reconstruction.
The irony.
The irony. I liked him. I loved him. I was quoted in the Washington Post magazine, which is like their monthly thing or something. And I said it, and I didn't realize that how profound it was, I guess, until I read it in the magazine. But I said that I love Tim Scott. I would, if Tim Scott needed a kidney, I'd give him my kidney, and I absolutely would never vote for him. Like that is South Carolina politics and relationships. In one saying right there, I've learned that relationships really matter, and I can't wait to get out there and run again. And I look forward to doing it in the very, very near future.
Yeah, well, do tell us a little more. Maybe what are you thinking?
I'm unashamed. I look forward to running for Congress. There are a lot of people who have asked me to run for governor in 2022. We're not there yet. We're not Georgia, North Carolina, or Virginia. I think Joe Cunningham is going to be a fascinating candidate to watch. I think people are asking me to run against Tim Scott in 2022, and I don't believe in being political martyrs. Again, we're not Georgia. We're not Virginia or North Carolina in that sense either. But I do look forward to running for the 6th congressional district, and I hope that time comes sooner rather than later.
Mm-hmm. What do you think should be the state's focus in terms of political reform, the way the process works, the way the electoral process works?
So I think that in order to get more people engaged in the process, you have to create new industry. I am somebody who believes that we should legalize marijuana, at least medical marijuana. I think that the growth, not only does our climate, is it suitable for the growth of marijuana because of, we grew cotton, tobacco, switchgrass, soy, et cetera, especially through that low country area, but it creates a new stream of revenue. There's about, I want to say in New Jersey, they're expecting about $435 million in revenue. Mm-hmm. Imagine if we had that revenue for our roads, bridges, schools in South Carolina. I think it would go a long way. I think that gaming is something that we also need to look at as well. But imagine trying to run up against the Southern Baptists with those two ideas, Adam.
Well, the trend regarding marijuana and hemp, there's already legal hemp farming in South Carolina. And
license. Yeah, it's a tough go. That's an expensive crop that fails more times than you're successful.
Oh, does it? Yeah.
Really
but I think there's potential there. And imagine how much more mellow everybody will be.
Criminal defense attorney. I've never.
That was a joke. I'm sorry.
Violent crime on marijuana.
Yeah. No. Yeah. Come on. Absurd.
They may fall asleep, but they're not committing violence.
Right. They think they're driving fast, but they're not. Don't drive and smoke. I'm not advocating that. Please don't. Nobody should do that. Well, any questions from any of our viewers? I can go on if
have some.
If there aren't any, but I'm looking at the notes. If you have a question, type it into the chat, and we'll ask him. Biden administration, am I being too optimistic?
Let's see. I'm grateful for this question, but I'm looking for it. Oh, I think here she is. I'm grateful for the discussion of the unique issues of Black farmers, which we see in the Low Country, but I'm looking for tremendous progress with the Biden administration. Am I being too optimistic? The answer to that is no, you're not being too optimistic, but let's also be real. One of my biggest issues with the Democratic Party right now is that we did not go out and work hard to have this election in November for us to create an agenda that's palatable to Kyrsten Sinema and Joe Manchin. Like that's not how this worked. But it's still 50-50 when you don't win in races that you're supposed to win, like in Maine, like in North Carolina. These races where people thought you would get 52, 53, 54 seats, then you end up with this. But also, anybody who thought that Joe Biden was going to be like JFK or FDR, this big, bold, progressive thinker, just really wasn't watching Joe Biden and doesn't know Joe Biden. I think that Joe Biden is really good he's perfect for this moment.
And his agenda is surprisingly progressive, given who he is.
Yeah, it's way more progressive than people would give him credit for, and popular and bipartisan. I mean, no Republicans in DC are supporting it, but
Yes. Speaking of which, speaking of bipartisanship, do you think they should abolish the filibuster so that they can push through? Yeah.
Pro relic. I hate the filibuster.
So
the craziest thing is, if you don't abolish the filibuster, then you can't pass voting rights. If you can't pass voting rights, Democrats will never win another election in this country because we won't have the checks and balances of Section 5 of the VRA, which has been gutted. People can do anything they want to do in these states, and Republicans control 33 state legislatures. So yes, the filibuster. Why do you have a majority if you can't operate as a majority? I mean, it makes no sense. I believe that it should be a deliberate body, but it should do something. Right now, the Senate is like my wife's front door with all of these Amazon packages stacked up. That's how many bills they have stacked up in front of it. They don't do anything. When I come home every day from work, there is bought Amazon packages. She doesn't even remember what she got. That's like Mitch McConnell and Chuck Schumer right now. When they come outside the door, it's just house bills stacked up everywhere. And it's just, it's so inefficient that yes, abolishing the filibuster gets me riled up.
And what about the Electoral College?
Yeah, you got to tell me a better system. You want a popular vote? It's funny how my friends to the left want to abolish the Electoral College, but I'm like, it was good enough for a skinny guy with a funny name named Barack Obama. Not once, but twice.
But he also won the popular vote.
Yeah, he did. And Democrats have won 7 out of the last 8 popular votes. My biggest problem is somewhat selfish with the Electoral College, that no one would ever campaign in South Carolina. No one would ever campaign in Georgia outside of Atlanta. No one would ever campaign in Mississippi. No one would ever campaign in Virginia. You would literally just campaign in New York, LA. You might stop in Charlotte randomly. You'll go to Atlanta, but it outside of urban America, there would be no love shared.
But nobody campaigns in South Carolina anyway after the primaries. They're only here for the primaries.
Probably not the best example, but North Carolina, for example. Okay, Georgia, for example.
Yeah, I mean, the swing states.
Why would you go to Arizona? You wouldn't. You would go to Houston, right? You would go to Chicago. I mean, you would go to these other places. Like you wouldn't. I just think that I appreciate the fight. Like we're 200,000 votes away from flipping Texas. Like I appreciate the fight and the energy that goes into flipping these states. And I'm not who was the only one who won? The last Republicans to win the popular vote were George Bush Kerry and H.W. Bush. Mm-hmm. And so, yeah, but I'm not in favor of abolishing the Electoral College at this time.
So what do you think about Joe Cunningham's chances if he were interested in running for governor? And the larger question is that somebody posed here, Joe Tuning, how do you get white people to vote for Democrats?
That's a good question. So, I mean, let's ask it. Let's ask an even better question, I think, which is, I refer to it as like, we now refer to it as like the $109 million, that Jamie Harrison type question, that $109 million question. How do you get white folk who make under $50,000 to vote in their own self-interest, not against it? And uniquely enough, I think the way you do that is, and the way Joe Cunningham wins, and to answer Joe Tuning's question, is you have to trick the deck, like Jim Hodges did when he had the lottery on the ballot as well. I think in this instance, you got to have marijuana on the ballot, or you have to have gaming on the ballot. You have to have a minimum wage increase on the ballot. You got to have these really popular initiatives that are going along, these constitutional changes that are going along with you in order to not only expand the electorate, but get people to vote for you and with you on that issue.
Yeah. That it would be interesting to see, because in other words, you're saying if they see a ballot full of things that they like, then maybe they'll be more inclined to go with the people who would actually implement those things.
Correct. I mean, you are the candidate. I mean, Jim Hodges, yeah, one of the best ads, um, one of the best ads in recent South Carolina history, um, was the Bubba ad. I don't know if y'all seen the Bubba ad. It's a legendary ad. You can go back and probably find it on YouTube, but it was Jim Hodges. He was running for governor against Beasley. And there were they were sitting in Georgia, and they had on these Georgia Bulldogs hats, and they were thanking all these South Carolinians for coming and supporting the state of South Carolina. I mean, the state of Georgia and all this stuff, because you had to go to Georgia to buy lottery tickets. And it was such a resounding ad that people remember it, because Jim Hodges was for the lottery. Beasley was against it, and you ended up with Jim Hodges being governor.
For 4 years, I think, right? One term, was he?
Yeah, he got beat by Mark Sanford.
Yeah, there we go. What about voter suppression? I mean, this is back, in fact, it's before the Supreme Court currently. Well, voter suppression, the Voting Rights Act, again, is before the Supreme Court. And, Stacey Abrams seems to have one solution, which is enormous, consistent, dedicated, committed, ongoing grassroots campaigning to get people registered and to convince them to go to the polls and to help them get to the polls and all those things. That seems like a whole lot of effort, though, and maybe unsustainable and difficult from state to state. What should we do?
So yeah, first thing you have to do is pass the John Lewis Voting Rights Act. That's first. That will give you many of the protections that you need. Second is, yeah, you got to do as Stacey does. But I remember when Stacey first, and there are other groups outside of Stacey. There are Black Voters Matter with LaTosha Brown and Cliff Albright. There are a bunch of groups. I remember when Stacey started her, I can't even remember the name of her organization now.
I don't remember either.
I can't remember.
Stacey Abrams, her organization.
Yeah. But she started it in 2014. I mean, I remember looking at the budget for it and everything. She started like a $500,000 budget. I mean, it's now a $100 million organization. And she did it on a sub-precinct level. I mean, what we have to do is, outside of Columbia and Charleston, begin to go into these rural areas, and you got to run people from dog catcher up. And you have to organize on a sub-precinct level consistently, have captains, have meetings, these type things. Sustain. Yeah. It is sustainable. It's expensive, but it's sustainable. I would tell you, though, even venturing further than that, and one of the things that HR 1 is dealing with that they just passed, but you have to abolish the filibuster to get there, is I think that one of the most unconstitutional, it's hard for me to say unconstitutional when they rule it within the bounds of the Constitution. One of the more discriminatory practices is the way that we gerrymander and draw lines. Mm-hmm. There's an unholy alliance made between Republicans and Black Caucus members every 10 years, where Black Caucus members get more Black folk in their district, and Republicans gladly cede them and give them away. If you ever wanted to know why MUSC is in Jim Clyburn's district and most of downtown, I'll gladly tell you that story one day. I helped draw those lines. Most of downtown Charleston, especially many of the areas where Black folk live in Charleston, which isn't that many anymore, but a lot of these pockets, especially of low-income housing, are all in gyms, and he ended up with MUSC, and it goes all the way up to University of South Carolina when Tim Scott gave away many of these areas and picked up other parts. But you see these unholy alliances that are built, and we just have to have independent commissions that draw these lines
more fairly.
What's the number one priority for an elected official, right? Getting reelected. So if he's drawing his own lines, they ain't going to be fair. They're going to be in his best interest first.
Right. And it ensures that he keeps getting elected, but it also ensures that Democrats remain in the minority.
Correct.
So, yeah, that's a difficult thing to weigh. It kind of relates to that former question about, how do you balance your sense of civic duty and service to others with your own self-interest? Yeah, I don't know. So Georgia is interesting because Georgia has signaled the power of the Black vote, that it's sort of shown that there is a bloc that really can make a big difference, and by implication, not just in Georgia. So it would be interesting to see, how Stacey Abrams influences others in other states to really try to foster more engagement.
Yeah, I mean, that's an interesting. It's really interesting. I recall that I had to win. If I maximize voter turnout, and these numbers slip me a little bit because it's been 7 years, but if I maximize African American turnout, which means got it about 33, 34, 35%, which is extremely high in South Carolina, then I had to win something like 2.8 out of every 10 white folk, which is so hard in South Carolina. And people are like, that's not difficult. Let's take 10 white folk and count them. I can get you 2.5, 3. No, I landed around 1.4, 1.5. I mean, it's just a really, really difficult challenge. So then you have to, I mean, there are a lot of things. One of the things that we're starting to see are Democrats doing well in places that are growing, urban areas, and Republicans doing well in places that are shrinking, these rural areas, which bodes well in places like South Carolina, but does not bode well nationwide.
Okay, a couple more questions and then we can wind it down. Somebody's asking about, Holly Tickner's asking about Nikki Haley and her speech about racism at the Republican convention, and what you think about that, especially given the likelihood that she's gearing up for a presidential campaign. At least seems to be so to me. And I'll tack on to that my own question about Nikki Haley and the flag. She initially was not in favor of removing the flag in 2015.
In the campaign that we ran against her, Vincent Jean and I stood under the flag to ask for it to come down. Henry McMaster was nowhere to be found, and Nikki said, to quote, no CEO had asked her about the flag, so it's not an issue.
Yeah, right. And so it seems to me that there was a little bit of she understood that the political climate had shifted and that she had to go along. So I wonder to what extent it was truly genuine and sincere.
So listen, Nikki's complicated and Nikki's nuanced. And
Tell us about Nikki Haley. What do you think?
Nikki is complicated, she's nuanced, and she is a shrewd politician. She's one of the most gifted politicians this state has ever seen. You have to know Nikki to be able to call BS for what it is. I guess the best example of that is recently she tried to have her cake and eat it too with Donald Trump. She talked about how he was wrong and how he should not be the future and all this other stuff. In a newspaper interview, I can't remember who did it, whether or not it was Political or somebody, and then tried to go back and make amends with him, and that didn't go well. I mean, she always will try to thread that needle. I give her more credit than people normally do for the flag, because she still had to summon political courage and use all her capital to draw those people together. She still had to be the point person for something at that time that was really, really contentious. Although it seems like an easy decision, it was a hard thing to cobble all those people together. Like, none of the guys were going first. And that's the tragedy and the cowardice of it. Like, Lindsey wasn't stepping out there first to take the flag down. But if Nikki were to go, then the rest would come with him. So I give her more credit for that. She's going to be tough to beat for president of the United States. She really is. I see many of the things. I think Nikki is like a great mom. Like, I think Nikki is like she has when you're just with her and you're like drinking wine or talking or whatever, she's like a great personality to be around. But a lot of the things she does politically are pretty transparent. And I think that the biggest indictment on Nikki Haley is going to be how calculating she is and what she truly stands for and believes in. Because at this point, even those of us who know her know that what she stands for, what she believes in, is probably being president of the United States. But that's not a core value. Like, believing that you could be president of the United States, running for that office, and then actually standing for something are two totally different things. And I think Nikki needs to spend more time with herself, like really being forceful about, and that shit may have sold, about who she is and what she stands for. I've known Nikki for a long time. We're from the same county. Her dad taught at Voorhees. She's from Bamberg. I'm from Denmark. Like, we sat beside each other in the state house. Like, she's not a unknown quantity to me. I count Nikki as a friend, but I also, count her as a bullshit artist sometimes.
Mm-hmm. Do you think she's open to your input and feedback?
Yeah, I mean, we talked. She yelled at me last time we spoke, but we talked. I mean, let me not say yelled. She sent angry texts. But
like good friends do sometimes.
Yeah, it was late. I was like, okay, Nikki, good night. She's really, 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 really talented though. But I just think without convictions, you fail in this business at the end of the day.
Do you though? I mean, it doesn't seem like it's stopping a lot of people.
Yeah,
who are going back and forth and contradicting themselves left and right these days.
Made some missteps that are going to cost her with those who choose the nominee for the Republican Party.
In South Carolina. I mean, it reminds me of Trump. New Yorkers had Trump's number all along, but the rest of the country, I guess, didn't quite. And I wonder.
There are no Republicans in New York.
Well, there are some.
I mean, the Republicans in New York, I mean, they're just moderate Democrats in South Carolina.
Yeah, okay. Right. Well, anyway, okay, so if there are no other questions, here's your last call for questions. If anybody wants to chime in now and ask Bakari something or another, while you're thinking and typing, I will encourage everyone to order or buy My Vanishing Country, preferably from an independent neighborhood bookstore. Or we can order it from there and read it. It's a fascinating read. He really covers a lot of territory, and yet it's all held together beautifully by this very personal narrative voice. But he touches on some really wonderful and important issues, as well as a lot of pain and difficulty. And yes, there's a link, bookshop.org link that's just been posted for those who might be interested. John Bolton doesn't agree with you about Nikki if you read his book. He has little respect for her. Yeah, well.
I'm not a Bolton fan either, though. I was like, if you gave me a choice about if I had to
hang the mustache.
If I had to hang out with John Bolton or Nikki, I'd just be alone.
Really? Okay, fair enough. Well, thank you so much, everybody, for joining us. Thank you, Bakari Sellers, for joining us and sharing your thoughts with us. It's been stimulating and interesting.
And thank you for the Pat Conroy Literary Center, and just the example he set and how proud he made us of being a South Carolinian and all those good things. And may his memory be a blessing to us all.
And a shout out to Jonathan Haupt for carrying on his legacy and organizing these wonderful events, March 4th every year. Maybe next year it'll be in person.
Please, I'm coming back.
All right. Excellent. Thank you, everybody.
Bye-bye.